Welcome to the last day, and it's going to hurt me more than it will you to end this this module. I've really enjoyed presenting these materials. As I said, I think that what we've covered in this course, in these two modules, really speaks to a gap in the curriculum here at MIT, and I hope that this has been beneficial. But as material scientists, I imagine that in the back of your heads throughout the whole term, you've been kind of wondering from time to time, well, how does this specifically apply to me as a material scientist? And today I'm going to tie it all together, or I'm going to try to tie it all together, because finally I'm going to get to the story of graphene, which I've been promising to tell you all semester, and it's something that I came up with to sort of make this meaningful and applicable from a material science standpoint. And to introduce the subject of graphene and how it plays out in the world of material science and why it's relevant to you, I want to pose a question. And the question is, does the assertion of formal intellectual property rights inhibit or promote the dissemination of scientific knowledge? Because after all, that's what we're here for. We really come upon a fundamental question when it comes to intellectual property rights. Does it make the dissemination of knowledge more or less likely? And the story of graphene, I think, is illustrative of the answer to that question. As we all know, scientific journals are the way we publish basic research. And they are a two-sided platform that facilitate the exchange of knowledge. And I was just kind of going through the index of basic science journals as they apply to material science. And I'm sure you've heard of material science and engineering. This is one of my favorites, Colloid and Interface Science, the Journal of. Journal of Material Science, Nano Letters, Nano Research. I just did a really quick search, and these are just a smattering of the peer-reviewed journals that are out there just in the world of science, material science. These are journals that you're all going to come in contact with at one point, either performing your research or hopefully publishing the results of work that you've done. Publishing and copywriting work that you've done. And so when I say they're a two-sided platform, scientists and researchers and students and teachers and everybody that publishes in these journals uses these journals not only to disseminate their knowledge, but they also use it to access knowledge. And that's where the tension comes in. How does intellectual property interfere with these two-sided platforms? Scientific discoveries with potential commercial applicability, researchers, or more importantly, their investors, may seek to establish formal intellectual property rights over certain research that they've performed. They want to create a silo and control that information. Well, how does the control of that information affect its ultimate dissemination? How does it affect follow-on research? How does it inhibit the flow of or exchange of information or the development of particular aspects of the science? Does the assertion of patents and other formal intellectual property rights inhibit the dissemination of scientific knowledge? Or is it possible that formal intellectual property rights facilitate technology transfer across research generations by enabling the market for ideas? And that brings me to the story of graphene. This is a lovely image of the moire pattern for graphene on a hexagonal boron nitride, which I'm sure you all are familiar with. But I thought it was well, it's illustrative of what we're going to talk about, because graphene is really an amazing, amazing material. So on the face of it, graphene is pretty simple. It's made of what? Graphite. Anybody that's picked up a pencil knows what graphite is. Graphene is a single layer of carbon atoms, 3 thousandths or 300th nanometers thick, a million times thinner than paper. Yet it's 150 times stronger than steel and 20% more flexible. Now, Professor Eager will disagree with me somewhat on this, because as we all know, no matrix is perfect, and to a certain extent these numbers get pulled out of the you-know-what of the researchers that are responsible for creating these matrices. But the point is that it is stronger than steel, and it is more flexible. How much more stronger and how much more flexible, again, depends upon the integrity of the matrix and a lot of other factors. How much stronger and how much more flexible? Not any stronger than the weakest portion of the matrix, not any more flexible than the weakest part of the matrix.
All right, so,
I'm dreading this question already.
On behalf of Professor Eager, I'll say his knock on those numbers are that those are theoretical numbers,
Yeah.
and that the flaws dictate the ultimate mechanical properties and service. So on the nanometer scale, yes, but you can't scale that up to the continuum level to get those properties.
And so the point, the lasting point I want to make, though, is that it is generally more stronger than steel, and it is more flexible than steel for a given weight, certainly. And where do I get those numbers? I get them out of the research materials that are published in journals, which tells you what you need to know, I think, a little bit about when it comes to published results. But one thing that's undeniable, it conducts electricity better than copper or gold at a speed of 1 million meters per second. It sheds heat like crazy, and it's transparent as well as totally impermeable. And for someone like me that likes to ride very expensive bicycles, that is great stuff. Here's a hexagonal matrix. You can see the lattice work of the material. So way back in 2004, at the University of Manchester, the Institute of Microelectronics in Russia developed the first feasible approach to fabricating and characterizing graphene. No one could figure out how to create graphene because it's so thin and it's so difficult to make, to process. But two scientists using a one atom thick layer of Scotch tape on a block of graphite demonstrated a way of making it. This is the mechanical fabrication of graphene using Scotch tape. Actually, pretty brilliant. And although scientists theorized its existence for many years, the first researchers that were able to isolate graphene were these folks at the University of Manchester and microelectronics in Russia. And so it actually represented a intersection of both material science and physics. And their research proved what had been hypothesized for many years. And people were after this because graphene has tremendous potential in a lot of commercial applications, including transparent electrode materials, transistors, thermal interfaces, conductive polymer links, corrosion resistant and biocoatings, sensors and consumer products from bicycles to aircraft fuselages. So this is a material that people have been trying to fabricate for decades, and it wasn't until 2004 that they were able to isolate it and demonstrate a way of fabricating it.
Is graphene a thing? Is it a process? What is graphene?
Graphene is a thing. It's made up of very thin layers of graphite.
So it's just a scientific fact.
It's a scientific fact. The process for fabricating, though, graphene is something that is subject to intellectual property protection. But, you know, you're again, questions anticipating my, you know, my slides, but that's the thing that I'm glad you're sensitive to it, because graphite itself can't be patented, but any more than diamonds or carbon can be patented. But a process for creating a derivative of it, which results in a new material, which is graphene, is subject to intellectual property protection.
I recently read about an article where they use sheets of graphene tilted one on top of stacked one on top of each other, tilted at certain angles so that they get a superconductor. Is only the process to producing that, or also the final product in that case?
In that case, I don't know, because I don't know what you're talking about. I mean, I haven't read the paper. Certainly the process, but if it's just for creating a type of graphene, my guess is it's the process that is valuable. All right, but maybe they've produced some hybrid material called, maybe it's graphene 5, and in which case it may be something that would be subject to protection. It depends on the uniqueness of the material. Brian, did you know anything about this?
Yes, there were sheets stacked on 30 degrees, so that practically, if you look at from the top, you will see bigger hexagons. They prove that he is almost superconductor. I was wondering if the product was patentable or...
The process would probably be patentable, but in terms of if they'd actually be able to build it up.
You know, I can think of all kinds of ways to protect it as intellectual property. If its unique feature is that it is a superconductor, then you may be able to patent that. Of course, you could certainly patent it, like, has anybody heard of rayon? What's the other stuff that athletes wear? Dacron, or exactly. I mean, so there's all kinds of ways to protect it. So, you know, you may want to trademark this and come up with your own fancy little logo to differentiate or to associate that material with your process and with your commercial application of it. You know, so maybe everybody who's building superconductive, who requires superconductive material, will be like everybody who builds, who tries to make, gym equipment. You know, they're going to have to use the nylon or the rayon or the Dacron label and license it from you. So they're really similar.
Graphene's not trademarked.
Graphene is not trademarked. Again, graphene is, you know, a material. But in many ways, you know, it had the same hype as carbon fiber.
So you had said in an earlier lecture you can't patent something that's basically available in nature, or so if graphene is just a carbon chain, how are you able to patent that?
Well, I don't think you can patent graphene, but I think you can patent the process for creating it.
Just a synthetic graphene, like, you know, because all you have, if you reorient it, you'll get diamond. So the only difference between graphene and diamond is the arrangement of the atoms.
Well, yes, and the process for arranging them. That's where the creativity occurs. So in my view, I think that the process for creating graphene is what has the value in any event, and is what is subject to intellectual property protection. Obviously, you can't patent diamonds, but you could, because they're a naturally occurring substance. But if you can come up with a way of creating them, sure, you know.
They can make it with peanut butter, actually.
Well, which only proves which only proves the applicability of my demonstration concerning the patenting of a peanut butter and jelly sandwich, which I think you weren't here for. So, but I think you're right on point. Exactly. So, like I said, this represents a fundamental intersection of theoretical physics and material science. Now, once this process was identified, and now the commercial applications began to be considered a reality rather than just a dream, the dollar signs in people's eyes began to cause all kinds of follow-on research, explorations of the role of graphene in addressing fundamental questions of physics, and how to exploit this material from everything from bicycles to aircraft design. So once they had demonstrated a mechanical way of creating this substance, the commercial potential was finally becoming realized, and it drove a lot of research. So the dual nature of this research, physics and material science, because of it, many graphene researchers chose not only to disclose their findings in scientific journals like the ones that I showed, but they also decided to seek intellectual property protection for the processes that they were coming up with. And that brings us to patent paper pairs. The assertion of formal intellectual property rights has become sort of a prevalent form of disclosure that commentators in many journals like Nature Materials have editorialized that regardless of the journal's policies for emphasizing access to results, graphene is one of those things that if siloed by intellectual property protection like patents, could become bogged down in a patent thicket. And this is similar to something that happened in the biotech industry in the late 1990s. We had a case once where a researcher at a famous university was doing basic fundamental research on gene editing until she got a cease and desist letter one day from a company that claimed that they had the patent on the technology she was working on. And she stopped performing this research for almost 10 years until a trade association of biotech researchers actually got together and filed a lawsuit against this company that claimed to own the patent. And ultimately, the case ended up in the Supreme Court. And at that time, which was, I think, back in 2013, the Supreme Court, in a seminal decision, decided that organic materials like DNA could not be patented. And this was a huge decision in the Supreme Court at the time because basically what it said is you can't silo naturally occurring organisms. You can protect the processes for manipulating them, but when it came to strains of DNA for organisms, they weren't patentable. And of course, what happened is the research could follow on. And that was a huge case for researchers across the world of universities.
I mean, like Monsanto, they don't own any of
That's right. That's right. They own the processes, oftentimes. And to a certain extent, when they create unique or fabricate unique substances, they can own the patents on that. But nobody owns the patent on, no one owns the patent on the DNA of corn or soybeans. And that's where the fundamental research is being done. And it's being done because the Supreme Court said that you have to share that. Nobody owns that, not Monsanto, not anybody. So the folks at Nature and other journals were afraid that putting together patents and publications would control the information in such a way that it wouldn't be disseminated properly. And that brings me to the Sloan study that I think I referred to before. In 2012, some researchers at the Sloan School here conducted a study in order to evaluate the interrelationship between scientific journal publication and patenting by examining the incidence and impact of patent paper pairs in two particular journals, Nature Biotechnology and Nature Materials. Does everybody understand what a patent paper pair is? Patent paper pair is when you conduct basic research and, for instance, like Novosti, come up with a new process for fabricating a product like graphene. In addition to publishing a paper in Nature or Nano or Material Science and Engineering, you also seek patent protection for it. In fact, nowadays, almost everybody who publishes also seeks patent protection at the same time. And the question that they were trying to analyze at that time was whether that behavior, creating patent paper pairs in an effort to silo your research, inhibited the dissemination of scientific knowledge. So just as I said, patent paper pairs are the patents and papers that are issued simultaneously from the same project. I think it was 2012, the World Intellectual Property Organization found that 82% of patents developed by scientists from universities are linked to patent paper pairs. Patent paper pairs are especially prevalent in the university setting because that's where all the fundamental research, believe it or not, still goes on. It doesn't happen at Monsanto. It doesn't happen at General Motors. It doesn't happen at any large corporation to the extent that it happens in university settings. Even biotech companies are a poor second to the basic fundamental research that goes on in the university setting, and that's why you find such a high incidence of patent paper pairs in the university setting. And so they showed that authors have a propensity to develop patents and publish articles at the same time. Although I think that if you work at Novartis right now, it's probably 100%, patent paper pairs. Why? Because they've learned from the universities, and they've learned that controlling and siloing this information is the best way to commercialize and get the return on their investment.
I think that's also due to the fact that the research done inside the company usually is better protected by the secret inside the company rather than publishing and patenting the...
Sometimes, it's like Coca-Cola. Is it better to treat it as a trade secret, or is it better to treat it, as intellectual property? Because you're right, when you create intellectual property, you got to publish it. So as soon as you get that patent, it goes up on the USPTO website, and it's available to everybody. But if you silo the information as a trade secret, you have more control. So it's a philosophical decision, and it depends on. Usually, I think it depends on the commercial potential of the invention. Now, I won't go through it, but there's a whole formality towards citations, and I'll leave it to you to go over the materials. But there's a whole section on my lecture on citation analysis, if it happens to be, interesting to you. But it's basically a way of, and there are services that perform this. But it's basically a way of finding out what your competitors are doing. So let's say you're working on a new process for the extraction of graphene by electromagnetic means. Well, what you do in order to find out whether or not you have any competitors in this field, both in terms of determining whether or not your idea is patentable, or whether or not, and finding out what basic research is out there to help you, you perform a citation analysis. And in the world of intellectual property, there are companies that literally do this. And this is a typical citation analysis pie chart. Yeah.
Question on that. Just the scope of patents, because I saw an article that Motorola was purchased by Intel or something.
Yeah.
Along with it came 40,000 patents.
Yeah.
And I was thinking of the life of Motorola. That's several patents a day or something like that.
Yeah.
How big is the patent office? How many patents does it hold?
How big is the patent office? Does anybody know?
I think it's thousands of people.
There are millions of patents, and there are thousands of people that work at the USPTO. It's an enormous. And, it's flexed like a muscle. In the 80s, or going back even further, in the 40s, when patents were sort of discouraged because of antitrust concerns, it's a very political thing. The number of patents shrunk. In the years after that, there were periods of great expansion. Ever since we became a first-to-file country, and with the explosion of biotechnology, the number of patents out there has just skyrocketed. So comparing what the U.S. Patent Office has to process today with what they used to have to process just 20 years ago it's a little bit like, trying to drink vinegar from a fire hose. I mean, it's just overwhelming, the number of patents. And that's why some of the crazy patents that we talked about yesterday actually, slide through. It's an enormous undertaking that the USPTO performs. And they are literally awash in applications. That's why today 3 years is short for a patent application to be approved. So anyhow, going back to the Sloan study, they categorized patent paper pairs in two groups: the pre-granted period with no formal intellectual property right, and the post-granted period, which includes an IPR associated to the time period during which the articles are published. In essence, in performing the analysis to determine whether or not patent paper pairs inhibited scientific dissemination, they did a citation analysis. And they narrowed it with two journals. And anyhow, what they found is that their models established that patented articles were associated with statistically significant and strongly negative reductions in annual forward citations. A forward citation is simply a reference to your work in another person's work. So the way they measured how patent paper pairs were inhibiting the dissemination of scientific knowledge is they simply looked at follow-on articles to see if the paper that is associated with a patent paper pair is being referred to by subsequent authors and subsequent researchers. They felt that if it was mentioned less, it's an indication that people are staying away from it. Just like the other major manufacturers, automobile manufacturers, stayed away from electric cars for fear of infringing on Tesla's patents. Follow-on researchers in biotechnology and material science, according to this study, were not mentioning this these citations for past articles. In fact, the articles that they looked at in Nature Materials, they said experienced a yearly 5.2% decline in annual forward citations, which to the Sloan School was is statistically significant. Patented articles in the Journal of Nature Biotechnology experienced a large and statistically significant decline, according to the Sloan study. And so these results suggest that seeking a patent for an article published in either of these journals significantly hinders the follow-on citations and thus reducing the dissemination of scientific knowledge. So what they found is patent paper pairs are bad for the dissemination of knowledge. And by the way, if you can Google this, I could stand here all day and talk about the studies that have been done on this since the Sloan School study. In 2015, this significant study that was published by Polytechnique Montreal looked at the patent paper pair's impact on biotechnology patents. And what they found is that the owners of academic patents, which are owned by companies that receive, let me say that again, what they examined is the ownership of patents that show that academic patents that are owned by companies receive higher citations in their first years, and they diminish the next few years and disappear completely as time goes on. And as a result, academic patents owned by industries but originally signed to universities are remarkably higher quality compared with patents assigned directly to industrial assignees. And this is due to the fact that patents assigned to companies mostly target direct commercial benefits in the short term, while patents owned by universities are used as basically a basis for follow-on research. So companies are more interested in the bottom line and immediate commercial exploitation, as anybody who works at Novartis or another drug company will tell you. And what they want to know is how can we get this to market and apply it. But here in the university setting, I don't know that anyone has ever come up to you and say, how can we best commercially monetize this research that you're working on? It's always a secondary consideration in a university setting. So those patents are much more valuable. So does patent protection affect a researcher's tendency to generate more knowledge? Proponents suggest that IPR protection promotes innovation and scientific development through financial and social benefits. Critics argue that intellectual property right protection has a negative impact on innovation, arguing that IPR protection amounts to privatization of knowledge and thus preventing knowledge flow between the ideas that researchers have and innovation. It's the same tension we've been talking about from the very beginning. Whether you're writing a copyright or a patent law, if you're in Congress, deciding how long the term of a patent should be, or making any sort of decision when it comes to intellectual property rights, there's this constant tension between the dissemination of scientific knowledge and the right of an inventor to commercially exploit and get a reasonable return on their investment. That's the tension throughout intellectual property law. And scientists share their ideas through publications and receive recognition from other researchers. So when you publish in Nature or Nanotechnology Review or any of the other scientific journals, there's a lot of prestige associated with that, as anybody who knows who has written a paper here and gets to experience the can I be on the paper too thing. I mean, everybody wants to be. It's publish or perish. I mean, that's not fantasy. And in an academic setting, that's tremendously useful. The prestige that you get. So in an academic setting, the prestige of having published in one of these journals is as valuable as the commercial exploitation of an invention is to a company like Boeing or Novartis or Monsanto or any of the other companies that are more focused on the commercial exploitation of this knowledge. So there's revenues and there's prestige, and both are very important. We talked about how Tesla and Toyota gave away their patent technology. Tesla gave away their battery technology. Toyota gave away their technology for hydrogen vehicles. Why? Because they felt it was in their best interest, rather than silo that knowledge, to get the information out there and cause it to raise all boats, so to speak. There are other examples of how knowledge has been essentially given away. There's been a Nantucket Lyme disease research that was conducted by the MIT Media Lab. Kevin Esvelt over there has been doing a project that is hopefully going to result in a cure for Lyme disease. But one of the conditions that he established for this basic research was that it be disseminated and generally available so that other people can use that knowledge to come up with their own innovations when it comes to stopping the spread of Lyme disease. Just, another example, along with Toyota and Tesla and others who feel that the dissemination of knowledge trumps the commercial exploitation of it.
That is intellectual property. The mice are not.
The mice are, well, actually, the mice that were created for these studies are patentable because of their unique genetic makeup. What they do is they manipulate the DNA of the mice so that each mouse is identical to the other mice. So the process of manipulating that DNA is patentable. And so if you conduct a study, you can go out and buy 1,000 mice, and each mouse is identical to the other mouse. That has a value to researchers, obviously. Anyhow, this Lyme disease project, what they did is they needed to find genes that prevent some mice from transmitting the bacterium, and by creating and releasing mice with multiple copies of those genes, hopefully a population of these resistant mice would start running around Nantucket and would inhibit the propagation of this disease. It all depended, though, on the technology behind these identical copies of mice. You can look at the studies that he has published. It's all, like Tesla and like Toyota and like the others, it's all right there, and it's all free. But because he's a firm believer that new ventures like his could unilaterally change ecosystems shared by many people, and so transparency is terribly important. Really an enlightened philosophical approach to basic research. Bill and Melinda Gates, they've invested millions in a research project that will target a cure for malaria. Again, their foundation stipulates that all of their research is available to the public free of charge. You can Google it and literally come up with the latest that their foundation is conducting. And so we've talked about this. Is it, altruism or enlightened self-interest? In a sense, it's usually both, and it tends to be a win-win situation. When Tesla gives away their patent technology, everybody, they create a larger market for electronic cars, and they create a larger, and therefore they sell more electric cars. The public dissemination of information removes the threat of lawsuits and barriers, and so everybody benefits. There's more follow-on research. There's more commercial exploitation and development of these ideas. And it's an example of how, in many ways, the research community has sort of opposed the siloing of this information. So there are an awful lot of very altruistic people out there who are funding and performing basic research that benefits all of us as human beings, who believe philosophically that the dissemination of this information is everybody's best interest and in their own commercial interest in many cases, and therefore have resisted the temptation to silo the information. But what about those who have decided to silo the information? What about patent paper pairs? And what about the MIT Sloan School study? What effect did it have on graphene? So when you start with the initial mechanical exfoliation of graphene using Scotch tape, when that was the subject of intellectual property protection, did that stop the development of graphene and graphene-based products? The answer is no. In fact, what happened was an explosion of research on other methods for extracting and fabricating graphene. They developed a method for the liquid exfoliation of graphene, the electrochemical exfoliation of graphene, and using oxidants which use oxidants as the driving force for exfoliation. And they even have a chemical vapor method for creating graphene, which combines gas molecules in a reaction chamber and uses a little bit of gold. But the point is that the siloing of this information through patent paper pairs didn't in any way inhibit, in graphene's case, the advancement of the science or the dissemination of information or basic research that followed on. In fact, if anything, it caused people to do an end run around, researchers to do an end run around, knowing the commercial benefits of the product. So in the case of graphene, the Sloan study was quite frankly proven wrong. Here's a chart on the electrochemical exfoliation method for producing graphene. I argue that this never would have been possible had it not been for the siloing of that information, the mechanical extraction of graphene. What it did in graphene's case, contrary to the Sloan study's conclusion, is it drove research. It caused people to be more innovative. It caused the onset of more research, more development into different processes for fabricating the same material. So these new methods of extraction have led to new processes and methods that have shown that graphene can improve mechanical properties of a composite. It can share the strain when added to the epoxy resin matrix and make it stiffer. So what they're doing now with graphene is they're combining it with carbon fiber. So they lay down a layer of carbon fiber, then they'll lay down a layer of graphene and then sandwich it between another layer of carbon fiber, and you're getting better materials, so better than the original mechanical extraction method. Graphene is supplied now as nanoplatelets, which are a few atoms thick, in fact, they're pretty cheap now because so many people have been involved in the basic research. The siloing of the mechanical fabrication of graphene had absolutely no effect, and I would argue drove others to be more creative and innovative when it came to this particular product. And this is where this is my favorite part of it. This is trickle down material science, because I had nothing to do with the mechanical, electromagnetic, or the chemical extraction of graphene. But I am one of the direct beneficiaries of all that research because I own bicycles that are made in part with with graphene. There's a bicycle manufacturer called Darcy in England that makes these things now. But pretty soon you'll see Trek, and you'll see Cervelo, and you'll see all the other Specialized, all the other big bicycle manufacturers start using graphene in their composite bicycles. Why? Because it's cheaper than it ever used to be. It's stronger, it's flexible, and it conducts electricity. Nowadays, bicycles are equipped with all kinds of biomonitoring devices, and to be able to run those through a frame that is made in part with graphene makes it easier and cheaper to incorporate those features, which everybody is demanding now. In the particular case of the bicycle, one of the bicycles I have just been talking about, is about 1% graphene in the frame, and it's hooked together with epoxy resin and layered one layer over like a sandwich of carbon fiber. There's a picture of the actual frame. What you're actually looking at is the carbon fiber material that's laid down with the epoxy. The graphene is underneath it. And combining these two materials together, you get a material that's better than either carbon fiber or graphene. More flexible, lighter in terms of weight, conductivity, everything that you want in a material for bicycles. Combining graphene with carbon fiber makes it better than just a graphene frame or a carbon fiber frame. And airplane fuselages, I assume, are next. And there are any other number of things that you can think of that would benefit, that require strong, lightweight, conductive materials like graphene. And they're incorporating in bicycle helmets, in the soles of shoes that bicyclists use, because they need to be light and they need to be very stiff in order to have efficient power transfers. And the good part of it, and this is as of a few years ago, it cost $65 a gram for this stuff, or was $65 a gram. Now it's a fraction of that. There are all kinds of other applications. Let's see, I told you helmets, shoes, various components on a bicycle. Samsung and Sony have invented ways of making continuous sheets of it, so the aircraft industry may be interested in that. Because if you've ever seen one of these carbon fiber fuselages laid down, they use these huge autoclaves, and the stuff comes in these long blankets. Am I right? And that wasn't possible until Samsung and Sony came up with a process for creating these big sheets of it. And as I said, a kilo of nanoplatelets is less than $250 now, and that's gone down. That's gone down. So as you can come up with these ways of like creating large sheets of the stuff, you can think of the applications, the more and more applications that can be developed for it, instead of just expensive bicycles for people with ridiculous sports fantasy lives. That brings me to my final question. Do you think the dissemination of scientific information is inhibited or promoted by the assertion of intellectual property rights? Was the Sloan School right? Or have subsequent events, were they on the wrong side of history? Well, I argue the Sloan School got it wrong. God bless them. You know, the empirical method is a wonderful thing. But what I don't think those authors understood, and what I think that all of you need to understand, is you've got to understand your data. The reason I put so much in there about the way they perform this empirical analysis, because I had it drilled into my head for so many years. The one thing everybody forgets oftentimes that performs these empirical analysis is understanding their data. And I think what the people at the Sloan School have been proven, it has been proven, is that they didn't understand their data, because subsequently in the 15 years since then, research has exploded, not been inhibited by patent paper pairs. That's it. Anything else? All right. I just want to say what a privilege it has been for me. This is our last class. To stand up here in front of you and share this information. I think it's important to all of you. I hope you learned as much as I did this semester, or just a fraction of what I learned from you. And I really do appreciate the attendance, the participation, and just in general, the enthusiasm that I've seen for the course from the questions that I get online and so forth. So I know you got you got a paper to write and all that kind of stuff, and I'm looking forward to reading them. But today is my last day with you, and so I just wanted to say what a privilege it has been for me to stand up in front of you for these last 11 or 12 sessions and talk to you about something that I love. I hope we accomplished our goal of at least making you folks aware of something that hopefully will pay off when you get out there in the real world and start publishing patent paper pairs. So thanks a lot. Did you get that on film?